Before we begin, I want to warn you that this story contains mature themes. It deals with the challenges of new motherhood, family relationships, and infidelity. If these topics make you uncomfortable, you might want to stop watching now. You ever wake up next to someone and feel like they're a stranger? Like the person you built a life with is just there, moving through the same routines, speaking the same empty words, but the connection, the thing that made you choose them in the first place, is just gone? That's where I was with Celia. I'm 35 years old. I'd built a solid career, made good money, and by most standards, I should have been happy. That's the part that kept me up at night. On paper, I had everything: a beautiful wife, a comfortable home, stability. The kind of life I once thought I wanted. But something was missing. We'd been together for 10 years, married for 7. The beginning was everything you'd expect: wild, passionate, full of those late-night conversations where time disappears. Celia had this way of making me feel like I was the only guy in the room, like nothing else mattered when we were together. We used to laugh until our stomachs hurt. We used to crave each other, any excuse to touch, to kiss, to pull each other closer. She was my best friend. My person. But somewhere along the way, we lost it. At first, it was small. A missed goodnight kiss. A few too many late nights at work. Phones in our hands at dinner instead of looking at each other. Little things, right? But little things pile up. Celia's job became her entire life. I get it, she's ambitious, she wants to prove herself. But work didn't just take up her time. It took her attention, her energy, her interest in me. She'd come home late, exhausted, barely offering more than a quick peck on the cheek before slipping into bed and passing out. If I tried to start a conversation, I'd get half-hearted nods, distracted glances at her phone. She was there, but she wasn't present. Sex became rare. And when it did happen, it was different. There was a time when she couldn't keep her hands off me. When she'd pull me into the bedroom with that teasing smile, when I'd wake up to her lips on my neck, her fingers tracing lazy circles over my skin. Now it felt like a chore. A box to check off before rolling over and going to sleep. No passion. No urgency. I told myself it was just a phase. That this happens in marriage. That things would get better. But months turned into years, and the distance between us only grew. I stopped trying after a while. Stopped reaching for her at night. Stopped hoping she'd turn to me with that look in her eyes, the one that used to make my heart race. And that's when I found myself at Evergrove Spa. It started as a recommendation from a friend, one of those casual conversations over drinks where you admit your back is killing you, and someone swears that deep tissue massages are life-changing. I figured, why not? Maybe it'd help with the tension, the stress. That's where I met Kinsley O'Neill. She was young, mid-20s, maybe, soft-spoken, with this effortless kind of beauty. No heavy makeup, no flashy clothes. Just a quiet confidence, a warmth that made the room feel lighter the second she walked in. "Hi, Lane," she said that first day, her voice gentle, but sure. "I'll be taking care of you today." She was professional. Always polite, always respectful. The first few sessions were routine, a little small talk in the beginning, then silence as she worked. But the moment her hands touched me, I realized how long it had been since I'd felt anything like this. It wasn't sexual. Not at first. But there was something about the way she moved, slow, deliberate, intentional. She wasn't just going through the motions. She was paying attention. Feeling where my muscles were tense, where I carried my stress. Adjusting her pressure, her rhythm, without me even having to ask. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. It was just a massage. Just an hour of peace. But I found myself looking forward to it more than I wanted to admit. Week after week, I kept coming back. Always with her. It became a ritual. Walk in, see her smile, that small, knowing smile, lie down on the table, let everything else fade away. For an hour each week, the weight of my marriage, the loneliness, the silence at home, all of it disappeared. I told myself it was nothing. Just stress relief. Just relaxation. Just an escape. But looking back, I think I knew even then. I was playing with fire. And it didn't take long before things started to change. If you're still with me, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this. Trust me, there's so much more to uncover. You ever notice something change so gradually that you're not even sure when it started? Like a shift in the air, subtle at first, so small you tell yourself you're imagining it, until one day, you realize it's been happening all along? That's how it was with Kinsley. The first few months at Evergrove Spa were consistent, predictable. I came in once a week, lay on the table, let her work out the knots in my back. It was the only time I felt like I could actually breathe, like I wasn't just a ghost moving through my own life. But then, things started to change. It was little things at first. I'd be lying face down, eyes closed, and I'd feel the towel shift slightly. Not enough to be obvious, just enough that it wasn't where it was supposed to be. Maybe I moved. Maybe she moved it accidentally. I didn't think much of it. But it kept happening. Some weeks, the edge of the towel would slip just a little lower. Other weeks, I'd feel the warmth of her hands lingering on my inner thigh, her fingers pressing just a fraction higher than before. At first, I told myself I was reading too much into it. She's a professional. It's nothing. But there were other moments. Moments that made it harder to ignore. Like the way her fingertips would graze my skin just a second longer than necessary. Or how her hands would drift dangerously close before pulling away, as if she wanted to see how far she could go. And then there were the glances. When I flipped onto my back, she used to keep her eyes neutral, focused. But now, there was a hesitation, a flicker of something unspoken, before she'd adjust the towel. I caught her looking once. Just for a second. But it was long enough. She didn't blush. She didn't look away like she was embarrassed. She just met my gaze, her expression unreadable, then continued like nothing had happened. That was the moment I knew. It wasn't in my head. This was something. And I couldn't pretend I didn't notice anymore. I told myself it was harmless. It wasn't like I was doing anything. I never touched her. I never said anything inappropriate. But that didn't change the fact that I was thinking about it. A lot. Too much. Lying in bed at night, I'd replay those moments. The accidental touches, the slight shifts in her movements, the way my body reacted before my brain even had time to process what was happening. And it wasn't just at the spa. It bled into my life outside of it. At work, I'd find myself checking the clock, counting the days until my next appointment. In the middle of dinner with Celia, my mind would drift. What would Kinsley do this time? Would she take it further? Was she waiting for me to respond? And then there was Celia herself. Or rather, the absence of her. I don't know if she noticed me pulling away because, honestly, I don't think she was paying attention at all. She was always glued to her phone. Emails, social media, whatever it was that kept her occupied when we were sitting in the same room, but felt miles apart. Some nights, I'd try. I'd put my hand on her thigh, just to see if she'd react. Sometimes she'd brush me off, mumbling about how tired she was. Other times she wouldn't react at all, like she didn't even notice. I was disappearing, and she didn't even see it happening. And yet, at the spa, Kinsley saw me. Or at least, it felt like she did. That was the problem, wasn't it? This wasn't about sex. Not really. It was about feeling wanted. Feeling like I mattered. Feeling like someone was paying attention to me, even if it was just in stolen, fleeting moments on a massage table. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't just a massage anymore. This was playing with fire. And I was already too close to the flames. There are moments in life where you know, without a doubt, that you're about to cross a line. You see it right in front of you, clear as day, and you tell yourself you can stop, that you still have control. But the truth? The truth is, you already crossed it the moment you thought about it. It had been months since my first appointment at Evergrove Spa. By now, the routine was familiar: walk in, hear Kinsley's soft voice greet me, let my body sink into the table as her hands worked through the tension I carried. But somewhere along the way, that routine had changed. At first, I convinced myself it was all in my head. The lingering touches. The towel slipping just a little lower each week. The way her hands moved higher on my inner thighs, pressing just enough to make my pulse quicken. I told myself I was imagining it. That she was just doing her job. But the moment our eyes started meeting, the moment she stopped pretending it wasn't happening, everything shifted. She was pushing me. Testing me. And the worst part? I let her. I wanted her to. That day, I could tell something was different before she even touched me. The moment I walked in, Kinsley's expression was calmer than usual. More controlled. I lay face down like I always did, the towel draped loosely over my lower half. Her fingers pressed into my shoulders, kneading slow circles into my skin. At first, it was just a normal massage. Or at least, as normal as it could be after everything that had been happening. But then, her touch changed. It was subtle at first. Her fingers didn't just work out the tension. They lingered. Drew patterns. Moved slower than they needed to. And when she reached my lower back, I felt it, the towel shifting. It wasn't an accident this time. Her hands moved lower, working into my hips, then my upper thighs, pressing deep into the muscle. Too close. Too deliberate. I knew I should say something. Shift my position. Do something to stop it. But I didn't. I just lay there, heart pounding, pretending like I wasn't hyper-aware of every single movement she made. And then it happened. The towel was gone. One smooth motion. No hesitation. Just gone. I sucked in a breath. My skin was fully exposed beneath her hands, but Kinsley didn't falter. She didn't apologize. She just kept working, pressing, testing. Her hands moved over my thighs, closer than they ever had before. Slow. Controlled. Like she was daring me to stop her. Like she knew I wouldn't. And she was right. The flip, after what felt like an eternity, she finally reached for the towel again. She draped it back over me, but it barely covered anything. I was already too far gone. Her fingers hovered for a second, like she was considering adjusting it properly, then she didn't. She just let it sit there, barely shielding what needed to be shielded. And in that moment, in the silence of the room, we both knew. There were no more illusions about what was happening between us. When the session ended, I expected her to say something. But she didn't. She just cleaned up like normal, rolling up her oils and towels, moving with that same quiet precision she always did. The only thing different was the air between us, thicker now, heavier. I sat up, adjusting the towel around my waist, still trying to process what had just happened. Kinsley was standing near the door, watching me. She didn't blush. She didn't look embarrassed. She just held my gaze for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, just long enough to make sure I understood that whatever this was, it wasn't over. Then she turned, opened the door, and left. And I just sat there, staring at the floor, trying to convince myself that I still had control. Even though I knew, deep down, I had already lost it. Guilt and desire aren't supposed to exist in the same breath. But they do. They twist together, feeding off each other, blurring the lines between right and wrong until you don't even know where you stand anymore. That's where I was. I hadn't technically cheated. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about it. And that was almost worse. For days after that session, I walked around with a strange heaviness in my chest, like I was waiting for something to happen, waiting for a sign to tell me what to do. I told myself I'd end it. That I'd switch therapists, cancel my appointments, do whatever it took to put this behind me before it spiraled into something I couldn't control. But I didn't. Because every time I even thought about it, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. Not the kind that comes from something new, but the kind that comes from something forbidden. And that excitement was enough to drown out the guilt. At home, Celia was starting to notice. She wasn't stupid, she could see when something was off. "You've been quiet lately," she said one night over dinner. I looked up from my plate, barely processing her words. "Huh?" She sighed, setting down her fork. "You're distracted. Is it work?" I nodded. A lazy, easy lie. Because telling her the truth, that I couldn't stop thinking about another woman's hands on my body, that I was counting the days until my next fix, wasn't an option. She believed me. Or maybe she just didn't care enough to push further. Either way, the conversation ended there, and Celia went back to her phone, scrolling through emails, texts, or whatever else kept her attention everywhere but on me. I watched her from across the table, waiting for her to ask something else, to press me, to tell me she missed me. She didn't. And that should have been my wake-up call. But it wasn't. Instead, that night, when she rolled over in bed and fell asleep without so much as a glance in my direction, I checked the spa's website. I told myself I was just confirming my appointment. That's it. But that was a lie. Because my fingers didn't just hover over my booking details. They searched for her. Kinsley O'Neill. I found myself checking her schedule, scanning the available slots, making sure she was still listed. Making sure I hadn't imagined it. Making sure this wasn't just a dream. And then, for reasons I didn't want to admit, I checked again the next morning. And again at lunch. And again before bed. I didn't even need another appointment yet, but I booked one anyway. Just to see her. Just to know she was still there. It wasn't about the massage anymore. It was about her. The worst part? I started lying to myself. Convincing myself that as long as nothing happened outside the spa, it didn't count. That I wasn't doing anything wrong. That I wasn't crossing a line. It's just a harmless attraction. I haven't done anything wrong. As long as nothing happens outside the spa, it doesn't count. I repeated those words over and over, like a prayer, like if I said them enough, they'd become true. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't harmless anymore. This wasn't just a game. I had already lost control. And I wasn't sure I wanted it back. It became a loop. I'd wake up in the morning, look over at Celia, and feel nothing. I'd go to work, sit through meetings, answer emails, and all I could think about was Kinsley. I started imagining things that hadn't even happened yet. What if she whispered in my ear next time? What if she leaned in just a little closer? What if I let myself give in? The thoughts took on a life of their own. They filled the empty spaces of my day, feeding my need to see her again. By the time my next appointment rolled around, my hands were shaking. And that's when I knew I was in trouble. You ever feel like you're standing on the edge of something dangerous? Like one more step, one more decision, will send you over, and once you go, there's no climbing back up? That's where I was. I knew this was getting out of control. But when I walked into that room again, when I saw Kinsley standing there, waiting for me, I didn't care. Something felt different the moment I stepped inside. Kinsley wasn't standing by the massage table, adjusting the linens like she usually did. She was by the window, her back to me, staring out like she was lost in thought. For a second, I almost said her name. But before I could, she turned, her eyes meeting mine. And I knew. Whatever had been unspoken between us before, it was about to become very real. I undressed and lay face down, the way I always did. But the second her hands touched me, I knew this wasn't like the other times. There was no hesitation, no effort to maintain the illusion of professionalism. Her hands moved slower, pressing deep into my muscles, lingering in places they shouldn't. She was deliberate. Testing me. Waiting for me to react. And when she leaned down, so close I could feel the warmth of her breath against my ear, her voice was barely a whisper. "You seem tense today." A shiver ran down my spine. I swallowed hard. She had never spoken like that before. It wasn't just small talk. It was a challenge. Pushed to the edge, her hand slid lower. Much lower. Slow. Teasing. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat, my entire body on high alert. She was so close. One more move, one more shift of her hands, and there'd be no going back. I should have stopped it. I should have ended this before it got worse. But I didn't. Because at that moment, nothing else existed. Not my marriage. Not my guilt. Not my responsibilities. Just her hands, her breath, and the unbearable tension between us. And then, just like that, she stopped. Her hands stilled. The room was silent. For a moment, neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. We both knew what was about to happen. The question was I going to let it? There are moments that don't need words. Moments where the weight of what almost happened is heavier than the act itself. This was one of those moments. Kinsley's hands were still on me. Barely. Her fingers hovered for just a second, frozen in place, like she was caught between two choices. And then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. She pulled away. No explanation. No final touch. Just distance. I stayed still, my breath unsteady, waiting for something, a sign, a word, a decision. But she didn't give me one. Instead, she stepped back, wiped her hands on a towel, and said, in the same calm, professional voice she always used, "That's all for today." That's all. Like nothing had just happened. Like she hadn't just held me on the edge of something irreversible and then walked away. Like she hadn't just left me there, aching, confused, and completely unraveling. I sat up slowly, pulling the towel over myself, trying to ground myself in reality. My body was still tense, my mind racing. I should have said something. Asked her why. Asked if she had changed her mind, if she regretted it, or if this was just another way to keep me hooked. But I didn't. Because I wasn't sure which answer I wanted. Instead, I just nodded, muttered a quiet, "Thanks," and got dressed, my hands unsteady as I buttoned my shirt. By the time I looked up, Kinsley was already by the door, her face unreadable. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look relieved. She just looked in control. And for the first time, I realized, maybe that was the point. Maybe she never intended to let it happen. Maybe this was all part of the game. Or maybe, just maybe, she felt something too. Going home, feeling hollow, the drive home felt longer than usual. The city lights blurred past me, the radio played some song I wasn't really hearing. All I could think about was how close I had come. How easy it would have been to let it happen. How much I still wanted it to. And yet, despite everything, the guilt, the craving, the war inside me, I felt something else, something I didn't want to admit. I felt disappointed. And that scared the hell out of me. I had spent weeks convincing myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. That as long as I never actually crossed the line, I wasn't betraying Celia. But if that was true, then why did I feel like I had already cheated in my mind 1,000 times? Why did I feel more connected to a woman I barely knew than the one waiting for me at home? Celia was already in bed when I got home. She was sitting up, her laptop resting on her legs, her face lit by the screen's glow. For a moment, she didn't even look up. She just kept typing. I stood there in the doorway, watching her, wondering how I got here, how we got here. How I could come so close to ruining everything and she wouldn't even notice. Then, finally, she spoke. "Are you happy with us?" I blinked. The question hit me harder than I expected. My throat went dry. What? She sighed, closed her laptop, and set it aside. I don't mean right now. I mean, us. In general. Are you happy? My pulse pounded in my ears. Did she know? Had she sensed something? Or was she feeling the same distance I was? I opened my mouth to answer, but I didn't know what the truth even was anymore. The weight of the moment, the room felt too quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling fan, the distant sound of a car passing outside. Celia was looking at me now, really looking at me, and for the first time in a long time I felt exposed. I should have said something. I should have told her the truth. That I missed her. That I felt invisible. That I had been looking for something, anything, to fill the space between us. That I had found it in someone else. But I didn't. I just stood there, staring at her, because I didn't know what answer she wanted. Or maybe I didn't know what answer I wanted. If I said yes, I'd be lying. If I said no, then what? Would I admit what had been happening? Would I walk away from Kinsley? Or was I already too deep to stop? I swallowed hard. And then, finally, no answer. No resolution. Just a question hanging in the air, waiting to be answered. Waiting to change everything. Either way, I want to hear what you think. Tell me, what would you do if your world fell apart like mine did? How would you move forward? Let me know in the comments. And if this story made you feel something, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.